Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to talk to people from Southern Oregon, Northern California, with a story to tell. I want you to meet, well, you already know him because his voice is so familiar. Let's listen as he makes his announcement once again.
You're watching viewer-supported KBLN Better Life Television.
Wow! I've heard it lots more times than I've seen you. What's your name and what's your story?
Well, I'm Paul Gordon. We lived in Oregon way back in earlier days. My last son was born in Canyonville.
Well, that's Southern Oregon, Douglas County.
Yes.
What was your work in Southern Oregon?
Well, I was teaching high school age young people. And my special field, of course, is Bible teaching.
And this was in in Milo?
Yes, at Milo. I was there for 4 years. Went back there as a very young man. And that's a few years ago. I joined the staff there at Milo in 1959.
Okay, well, what about that young fella you just talked about, your son?
Well, we're real proud of him because he's now a bank manager. He, of course, lives out on the East Coast, but he's a bank manager. Didn't quite finish college, but he got his training in banking by working at that particular field for a while.
And there's other children too?
Yes, he's the youngest. We have a son, Doug, that's Mark, the one who's the bank manager. We have an older son, Doug, who is 54, I guess now. He is a printer by trade. And has done that for many years. Very artistic. He likes to make pottery, and he does photography. He does weddings sometimes when he has an opportunity. So he's a very artistic person.
So there are two boys.
Two boys. And then we have twin daughters in between them, Kathy and Karen. Kathy is an optician working at Walmart in Indiana. And Karen is a nurse and lives in Orlando. We just had the opportunity to visit with them just a couple weeks ago.
Oh my goodness. This is East Coast, West Coast.
Yes, I spent more than 31 years on the East Coast after beginning my work actually here in Oregon.
And teaching, and then when you got to the East Coast, what was this?
There's a church headquarters that I worked at, and I traveled rather extensively representing the church, visiting schools, groups of pastors, others. I've estimated I've been in about 120 countries in that particular role.
Oh, wow.
What interesting places I've been in.
And not everyone would have TV like us.
No, my first overseas, what I would call overseas trip away from the United States, interestingly, was India. We arrived on a big 747 at 3 o'clock in the morning in Bombay, and I had to get a taxi to find a place to stay, and then that was my introduction to India. It's a very interesting country. Millions, well, I guess maybe 1 billion now.
And so different.
Yes, it is. In fact, that's what's interesting about traveling, and I've done a lot of it during those 31 years. Traveling is an education in itself. You don't have to go to school to learn all that you can learn. It's an education. It's just fascinating because you meet people in all kinds of cultures. You have all kinds of experiences that are not really American. They're out there somewhere. I have, stayed in some of the most luxurious hotels, and I've stayed in very simple little things that were called hotels with a mud path leading up to them. And
maybe one that led out to the back.
That's about right. That's about right. It's very primitive in some of these countries.
Well, now we've heard about the family and we've heard about your work, but there's a lovely lady here in the studio today.
Yes.
And this lady mentioned to me she'd been married to you for 54 years.
55 years.
Ah.
55 years. You know, marriage is an interesting thing. You don't realize what you're getting into, and you don't realize how long it's going to be.
Right.
And 55 years is a long time. But we were married fairly young. I had just graduated from college, and she had 2 years of college when we were married. She was just 19, and I was 22.
And it does last. That's wonderful.
And it has lasted.
But what brought you two back to Southern Oregon?
Well, I began my work in Oregon, and my version of Oregon is more rain and that type of thing, like sometimes they have on the coast. But I had family here. Donna, my wife, had 2 brothers who were living here. One a dentist in Medford, and the other one living here, retired.
Their names are?
Well, Harvard is the dentist.
We call him Harvey.
Yeah, Harv. He passed away about 3 years ago.
His last name, the family last name? Neat fella.
Yeah.
I just, you know, he not only did dentistry well, he was a people person.
Oh, definitely. Very outgoing. And it's interesting that my wife is the last of 4 children. Her 3 older are all brothers. 2 of them are clergymen, ministers, and Harv is a dentist.
And the 2 older, the 2 clergy are who?
Floyd, and he lives in Medford. So that helped to draw us here too. And then Wilton, her oldest brother, is 85. He lives in Salem. So we're all Oregonians now.
And so you've decided, well, this is a good place. You chose the best of the world, I think, to retire in.
Oh, I think so. I don't think there's any question, but what this is superior to, and I may make some people unhappy, but it's superior to some of the things in the rest of Oregon. We lived in Tillamook, for example.
Oh, we'll let it rain.
Tillamook, it's just rain and fog and not a very happy climate. And right now, of course, when this is shown, it'll be long after, but they've had quite a storm out there.
Right, and it's
Tillamook.
Cheese.
Tillamook
cheese.
Trees, cheese, and open seas or something.
Perfect. We hear about Portland and their weather and their, you know, it's different. Even though they seem to have Eugene, Salem, Portland have a superior hand on politics and the like. This Southern Oregon, Northern California, we have something unique down here. And it's partly the weather.
Definitely. It's less humid. We get less rain here in Medford, Grants Pass area than you do in most other parts in Oregon, except in eastern Oregon, of course.
Which is pretty close to perfect out there, too.
That's kind of a high desert country over in Bend and Redmond.
And it makes me feel cold.
Yeah. In fact, Redmond was our first home after we were married. So we got acquainted with the eastern Oregon early. We lived in Tillamook, we lived in Glen Eden Beach, we lived in Newport, we lived in Eugene for a while. We were married in Eugene.
But this great draw, where's home now and why?
Well, that's an interesting question because I had appointments in San Diego back in, 1989, I guess. 99, 98. And my wife wanted to come out here to see her brothers. So she came here. We had just retired shortly before that, and she was looking for a house. Now, I didn't know whether she would find anything, but when I got here, she says, I found the place.
Oh.
And so I didn't have much choice. I just had to agree to what she had found. We live in Eagle Point, actually, just off the Eagle Point golf course, and a beautiful spot. We can look out and see Table Rock and behind us. And Our backyard is a golf course.
And that is a part that has so much history.
Oh, yes.
Eagle Point, I feel a kinship to the military cemetery there. It's like almost our way of saying thank you and goodbye.
Yes. I've been at a few funerals there with the taps made, blown, and it actually is just behind the golf course. I can almost see the military cemetery from our house.
I'm so proud of that community because they have decided, well, we went to the 4th of July parade, and they asked in the nicest way to please, gentlemen, take off your hats for the national anthem. And I thought, you know, this not only fills us with pride of what's been done in the past, but it reminds us that we can say thank you on into the future.
Oh, yes. We've enjoyed the fireworks on the 4th of July.
Oh, yes.
That's a great place to watch them. They have a kind of an interesting habit in terms of the fireworks. They'll, at the beginning, they say, now the next fireworks is sponsored by so-and-so. Then they blow off the fireworks, and then the next one is sponsored by someone else.
Very community, isn't it?
It's out at this high school, and they really have a wonderful display at 4th of July.
Now, what's with the covered bridge?
Well, it's a remnant of the earlier days. It isn't used except for walking today, but it preserves something of the past. And of course, there is an old mill there, a water mill, which is very interesting. It's been recently purchased by a family, and they make quite a thing out of the mill there. It's goes back in the 1800s, and it's a historical type town.
I wouldn't have guests that have a chance and not take them there. Yeah, I think that much of it.
The mill.
The mill. And I
Yes.
found out when my nephew Brent was marrying, the gal he was marrying was already ordering from the mill.
Sure.
And she lived in the East Coast. She didn't know about Oregon then, but now, you know, we continue. It is part of Southern Oregon history that seems to have retained history.
Well, they actually grind it's an operating mill. They grind the wheat and whatever, you know, they grind, and you can buy it right there. It's for sale. It's just like walking back 100 more years to see it, but you can go right down and watch the grinders, the mill working.
Have you walked down the little path to watch the wheels
Yes.
turn?
Yes.
Right at the edge of the
Yes.
creek.
Let's see, I was trying to think of the name. That's not Bear Creek, it's another name. Butte Creek, is it?
I bet that's
think
the
so.
name of the,
Yeah.
of the mill.
But it's a nice reminder of the past.
It is indeed. So that's two reasons. I bet there's other things that you've found here in the...
Well, I've always been interested in history, and of course that has helped me to do that. But I always liked Oregon. We lived in Oregon at the beginning of my work, and we were here in Oregon from 1952 when I graduated from college until 1963. So about 11 years or 12 years. And then we moved to Washington, and then from there back east. And so I had 12 or 13 full years here. And of course, beyond that, as a boy, as a young man in college, I lived in Salem. Ran a door-to-door bakery truck, believe it or not.
Now that I want to know more about.
Well, it was an interesting thing. It was a bakery in Portland, and they had door-to-door trucks, and in the summer I was looking for work, and somebody suggested, why don't you see if you can deliver bakery goods? And
Yeah.
so I drove a truck up toward old Detroit lakes. They were building the dam up there and so forth, and I started a route up there. Went up there the first summer. The next summer, I worked 2 summers at that particular
Well,
thing.
what bakery was it? Was it Ross?
Marble.
Okay.
Marvel Bakery.
Was
And so, you know, that was a part of our life. That's, by the way, where I learned to eat donuts. Oh, I loved donuts. And if anything was left over at the end of the day, I found a way to get rid of it.
Oh, they needed help. They needed help. Well, when we would go to Portland, they would come with these beautiful donuts to our church camp.
Sure.
And I tell you, I measure any other donut up to that.
Yeah.
And if it's not up to that, well, it's not worth eating. I have this
Yeah.
high standard.
What I did with this bakery work, I had a place early on the route where they had eggs, chickens, and so I'd buy several crates of eggs, and we had ice cream container where you could have ice cream and donuts, and I wonder if you can guess what it costs for a loaf of bread.
19 cents?
20 cents.
Uh-huh.
Now, some of those folks complained because in the stores you could get it for 18 or 19 cents. But I told them, I said, you know, I'm bringing this right to your door, you know. And so I sold bread, big 1.5-pound loaves for 20 cents.
Now, was it white fluffy bread?
White fluffy bread usually.
Oh.
We had some other too, but most of it was white fluffy. When the working was being done up at Detroit Dam, they had big apartment places where the families lived. And that was on my route. And I can still remember going into the apartment area and honking my horn, and all the housewives came running down. and I just sold bread and donuts and whatever by hand over fist. I made good money that summer.
Sounds great, because we had a neighborhood delivery truck, because
Sure.
we were a one-car family,
Sure.
and this was in California, and it would come around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that wasn't just the ice cream man, that was the bakery man.
Sure.
And such.
Well, that's what I did. I had both ice cream and bakery and eggs. That was they loved that. It was a good experience for a young fellow. I also worked one summer at a linen mill in Salem. Now, I don't think it even exists today. They made twine.
And it's called linen?
Called a linen mill. And what I did, that I worked early in the summer, someone had working there, and they were what they called a pin setter. You know what a pin setter is?
Bowling, I know, but
Well,
that's different.
That's a little different. The things that combed the cotton or the linen, the teeth on it would break occasionally and break off, and of course they'd have to replace them. And I was a pin setter. I would go in and we would replace the pins in those old combs, and that's the way I did at the beginning. The fellow that was there before me, that was all he did. He didn't want to do anything else. Well, I'd get done with the pin setting and I'd get bored, and I'd go to the manager and say, is there anything else I can do? And so I'd work around the mill. Later in the summer, I was a night watchman even for the mill.
I guess that's what gets me so excited,
Yeah.
because you don't pass up any learning opportunity.
Oh, it's wonderful. By the way, being a night watchman is as opposite from regular work as I can think of, because where everyone else is going to bed, you're getting up.
Okay.
And you're wandering around through a factory that's quiet and dark and whatever.
It's basically closed down, except
Yeah.
for one guy walking
Yeah,
around.
that was it. And I had to go around and punch at certain places, and of course that recorded, so that if I was not doing my job, why, they said, hey, you missed this one.
Check it out.
But it gave me a chance to do something other than pin setting. I got bored with that. But,
Of
variety.
course. Learning and learning.
Yeah.
Now let's slip right into Southern Oregon and
Okay.
Northern California. You've been here how long?
We came
This
in
time.
January of '99.
Okay.
So we've been here since then.
And what would you say are a few of your favorite things that just you wouldn't trade for anything in the whole wide world?
There's a lot of interesting programs here. Somebody would think that a little quiet country area, well, it's not so quiet country anymore, but would not have some of this. But Ashland has its Shakespeare Festival.
Right.
And they have some excellent programs here.
Baroque music, we
Oh,
know about that.
It's wonderful.
Art art exhibits?
You see, now I lived back east in the Washington, D.C. area, and we had lots of interesting things to go to.
Sure, you
And
could.
most of them were free. Not so here, usually, it's cost, but it's surprising how many interesting things you can do and see. Musical programs, there's some excellent musical programs here. We're members of a group that every 4 or 5, well, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, there's a new program, and we go to it.
A concert?
Yeah, piano, guitar, you name it, just a variety of things. So we really enjoyed that part of it.
Today I met the lady with her hand in a sling, and she is from the handbell choir and preparing. It had been such a strain on her hand that she has to have handbells, trumpets, you name an orchestra, and the Baroque music.
Yep.
Then there's the whole natural beauty.
Yes.
So if you want to pull out the tour guides from Southern Oregon, of course I'm going to brag about Crater Lake. If there's anybody here,
yes.
if you haven't done it.
Many times. My wife keeps telling me we need to go to Crater Lake again. Yes, there's just a lot of natural beauty. Of course, we have it right in our backyard. When I go to and from Eagle Point, I look out and see Mount McLaughlin every day, and that's a gorgeous mountain. It's somewhat like Mount Fuji in Japan. I've seen that one, but this one's beautiful.
I call it Ice Cream Cone Mountain. It always gives me a smile, and supposedly there's a history about the fact that it's snowy, and there comes a time when springtime, and you can see they call it the eagle. Mm-hmm. That's time you start planting your corn, when the eagle flies, but really it's just the melting of the snow.
Yeah.
Now, if you had, does your place include farming? Do you have?
No, we're in a community of houses surrounding a golf course there in Eagle Point. By the way, Eagle Point's been known as the fastest growing city in Oregon up until recently. The housing has slowed down. But around the golf course, when we first came there were probably 30 houses. There are now over 600. So it's grown, like the rest of Southern Oregon.
But the land was part of the military base, as I understand
I think you're right. White City now is.
Yeah, and we called it Camp White.
Yes.
And then after Camp White, after the military left, it was kind of like vacant.
Yes. They're making good use of it today with a place for veterans to live, and I think it's doing well.
Industrial Park is being...
That's another thing that's happening in Southern Oregon. When we first came there, it was a 2-lane road out to Eagle Point, and that was just in 1999. Now everything's 4-lane, and of course they have other big stores coming in and other businesses. It's really changing. It's becoming a big city area.
And what's that meant to you?
Well, easier shopping maybe, but just it makes it a little more difficult to get into town. It's a busy road, Highway 62, going from Eagle Point to Medford.
And if you go the other way, you go to Crater Lake, and that's what's got me excited.
There's some beautiful trees, by the way to Crater Lake. There's a corridor of lovely trees. They're not as large as the redwood,
right?
But there's a beautiful corridor of trees that you go through on the way to Crater Lake. And of course, if you want to get into trees, go down to the coast with the redwoods, which isn't that far away.
Right. Or there's trees on the way into Lake of the Woods, these kinds of places.
Yes.
Have you had time to investigate those new places? New to you, I guess.
Well, I'm not necessarily a fisherman, so I haven't gotten into the lakes.
Diamond Lake, where you...
I've been there, been to Crater Lake many times, and that's changing. It's a beautiful lake, wonderful to get up there. It's the most picturesque lake I know of, almost. Gorgeous.
Well, you've bragged about a few things, and I love it because that's what makes us all relook at our world. You've had many experiences since you've gotten here.
Well, I wish I could, I could tell you about these 120 countries I've been in, and that's a story in itself.
Right, and you...
visiting places of world interest that few people have had a chance to do, and I've been very fortunate that way.
And you were with the Ellen White Estates
at our church headquarters
and
for 31 and a half years.
And that's where?
In Washington, D.C., actually.
From there, I just tell you, this West Coast, with all, when I was in Washington, D.C., it was so crowded and so busy, and I felt so glad to fly back home. Do you ever feel that way?
Oh, yes. Of course, I've been in some countries that are a lot more crowded than Washington, D.C., but if you want to get crowded, just go down a street in Manila, Philippines, or in Bombay, India, or whatever. They don't observe any of the traffic signs in those places.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I've heard an interesting comment that when somebody blows his car horn, well, you know he's seen you, so you keep going.
Okay.
The blowing of the horn doesn't mean a thing except that he's seen you.
Oh. And your life is...
Well, in India, for example, you drive down the street and there's bullock carts and there's cows wandering through and animals of various kinds and carts and motorcycles and cars and trucks and buses, all mixed together.
Well, I have heard that the Oregon caveman Russians thought that, they were saying, this is what people are like out west. Yeah. But I'm so glad you chose to come here.
Well, we're glad too.
And this has been so much fun getting acquainted with you again and having you come. Keep that voice going because you're on the board here at Better Life Television.
Yes.
And I thank you so much for coming all the way from Eagle Point.
Eagle Point, thank you.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying thank you so much for tuning in and meeting the rest of this family. Thank you for being here.